Hey everybody, it's Professor Snart here checking in. It's a beautiful Friday afternoon. I've spent most of the day outside, so I'm just in the office for a quick hour maybe or less to record some videos to check in with everybody. So hopefully you've had some opportunity to get outside as well and enjoy weather that isn't raining or cold or like otherwise weird. So that's nice. So we're getting a little bit deeper into our course. You will have seen below, hopefully, a quick note on grading. We don't have a ton of grades yet, but just because our course goes so fast, we will. So I'm recording this on the Friday, which means we're finishing up replies for Unit 1. And it's quite possible that you've already moved into Unit 2, and obviously we have that reply. And now we have our more regular Tuesday, Thursday as we go through the rest of our class. So I'm just going to jump into Unit 2 here and kind of walk us through a few things. So this is really our first content unit. The first one, more introductions and just getting oriented and settled. Our first reading/listening here is the poem or song, depending on what format you're looking at it in, by one of my favorite hip-hop artists, Mos Def. So you can both, it's not really a video here, but you can listen and then also read. And I'm providing, this is our initial kind of reading here because it challenges right away our notions of what's like poetry or what's a lyric or what's maybe the crossover between those two. And our unit here really isn't about poetry and lyrics, but it's about the nature of poetry itself and where it is and how it kind of like exists in our culture. It's both really present, I would argue, but kind of marginal at the same time. It has this almost dual personality. And I chose this particular song or lyric because this poem, or this lyric, I don't even know what to call it, is actually printed. The first time I ran across it was not by listening to Mos Def, but actually in the Norton Introduction to Literature and the Norton Collection of Poetry. So like a college textbook, English textbook, that includes all the famous poems, ever in the world. So it's really fascinating to find something like this, not just, on YouTube as a song or whatever, but in an English textbook presented as poetry. So it's a really interesting way to think about like what poetry is, where it is, how we encounter it, and that's really what our unit is about here. We start off though with doing a shared slide deck, which you can see here. The instructions are included on the slide deck itself. And to do the actual work, you will click this link here, and we're all editing the same slide deck. So just be careful that you're not inadvertently writing over somebody or moving things around or changing the whole template or doing anything like that. So just sort of be careful when you're in there. We're just doing a poetry terms thing, so not really specific to a particular poem, but really kind of building our knowledge of poetry vocabulary. And some of the terms you'll see, you can see the slide deck here, right? A few people are already in. You'll find the terms sort of throughout. Do be careful not to both either duplicate what's already been defined or to get so crowded. Like Jasmine's done a couple here, so if I wanted to do something like dissonance and end rhyme, I would probably go into the slide deck, build a whole new blank slide, and maybe just move these terms. So give yourself whatever room that you need. Maybe even these whole four could go to a different slide. So feel free to move undefined words around so that you have the space that you want to work on. But again, make sure that you're not duplicating. Make sure that your name is there, like Joe has done, like Jasmine has done. And again, that's so we know who's defined what, and for my purposes, so I can grade it. So it's really important that you get your name there. Again, like the instructions say, we want to define the terms, give us a sense of like where your source might be. Don't just cut and paste, really kind of put them in your own words, and again, including your name. Okay, so you can see the slides here. We can click through them. Whoops, kind of goes all tweaky a little bit. But to access it and actually do the work, you want to click this link right here. The next piece of work is one of the ones that it uses a tool that I really, really like, and it's one of the, I think, most fun and I would say eye-opening things that we do, and I love that it comes almost first in our course as a thing to do. And this is really related more to the Mos Def, the lyric versus the poetry, and which of those things is which. So we're going to use a tool called Padlet. So you're going to use your phone, right? You're going to open a browser on your smartphone. There's no, actually, I think there is an app, but you don't have to use it. You can just put this link into the browser on your phone. Ideally, Chrome is the one that seems to work best, but, give it a try. It'll take you to, I'll show you here, basically what I call just like a digital corkboard. And it works, this is a mobile assignment, so you're not going to do it on your computer. So it'll open up and you'll just sort of have this blank spot and you'll see a few things that other people have posted. It'll all populate in one shared space here. Your assignment then is to kind of pursue this like poetry everywhere and nowhere. So you ask the average person, do you read poetry? Do you write poetry? Maybe, depending on your circle of friends, they'll say yes and be totally enthused about it. But I think for the average Joe, right, people don't really read poetry. They don't write it. They don't like attend to it. It's fairly marginal. They might not hate it or have an opinion about it. Pardon me. Some people might, but it's just kind of like peripheral, right? It's out there. That's what other people do and pay attention to. I think that's a common kind of societal or cultural view. But what I'm trying to discover, or have us discover here, is that it's actually all around us. Poetry is used to mark sometimes our biggest, most important public occasions, our most important private occasions, both the ones that are super exciting, like a birth, but also the ones that are melancholy and sad, maybe celebratory, but in a different way. We celebrate the life of somebody. But how often, right, think about it, do we turn to poetry? Either people write it, or they recite favorite ones, or kind of famous ones, or if you send a card that's meaningful, it will often have a poem in it. Sometimes they're silly, but there's also like lots of meaningful or well-meaning poetry out there. So all of a sudden we realize that poetry is actually really central in our lives, both our public life culturally, but also our personal lives too. So your job now is to do this as a mobile assignment. So before our next due date, at some point in your just normal life of doing stuff, you want to find actual poetry out there in the world. And I want to be really clear here, and for the folks who've posted already, you might want to revisit what you've done. If you read the instructions, we need to find actual words, not just something that you think is poetic, or that's usually a term we use for something that's kind of beautiful or touching. That's not what we're talking about here. There's lots of that in the world. We know that already. We want to find actual poetry. So you really have to have your eye open, and you'll be amazed, almost guarantee it, about how everywhere poetry is. I'm not going to tell you the places that I've seen it found before, but you'll be amazed once you open your eye and get it ready to find it. But it can't just be poetic, right? It has to be actual words that are existing out there, kind of arranged in space. Whether it's a physical thing or maybe a digital, but it's probably going to be a physical thing because it's like out there actually existing. So it can't just be poetic in some, oh, this is beautiful sense. Again, I would encourage these folks to sort of revisit their choices here. It has to be an actual thing that you're taking a picture of, the words that you're seeing. And of course, we don't want to just pull off the shelf our book of poems or our English textbook and flip and find the poem there and be like, oh, here's poetry in the world. Well, okay, it's technically in the world, but it's not really in a public space for anyone to see. We already know that poems exist in English, literature textbooks. So again, you're not just like Googling a poem, obviously. You're not pulling a book off the shelf, and you're not just finding something that's like beautiful or poetic. You are finding actual words that exist as poetry, like with line breaks and stuff like that are putting themselves forward as poetry, and taking a picture of it and posting it to our Padlet. And again, like these folks have done, although I think their choices are honestly not correct, sorry, make sure you could do a little description or kind of like explain where you find it and what this thing is. And then also, of course, like these folks have done, include your name. Same as above, make sure your name's on it so I can grade it. But really attend to, it's not just poetic, it's actual words, and it's not just pulling a book off the shelf because we know that poems are already hiding in there. We want to find them hiding in plain sight, as you might say. Okay? So there's, again, as we'll find at the end of each unit, a building out your portfolio piece. Make sure that you're doing that. There's no posting of this thing that has to happen. Just update your portfolio, and I can, find it through like Unit 1 links and other ways and stuff like that. Okay, so kind of some interesting stuff here. A good mix of the academic side, developing our poetry vocabulary, and then more of the, I don't know, non-academic, personal side maybe, finding poetry, actual words existing out there in the world. All right, have a great weekend and have fun with our Unit 2 assignments.